I'm explaining a film from 2019 titled The Informer. Spoilers ahead. Enjoy the content. The scene begins by revealing a man named Pete Kozlow. His cell phone rings, which is a call from the FBI informing them that their target will arrive soon with about 6 kilograms of fentanyl-type drugs. Not long after, it was the turn of another cell phone to ring. This time the call came from a fellow gangster named Stasek. They are talking about the arrival of their boss, including the drugs that will be smuggled later. Kozlow is also a responsible family guy. He urged his wife to move their child somewhere for protection since the dangers of his employment were too great. He also handed Sophia, his wife, a key and told her not to let anyone in before he came home. At the same time, an FBI agent named Wilcox was giving directions to her troops regarding the ambush on their target. Wilcox emphasized that the cops did not need to arrest or injure them. Instead, they needed to wait for her orders before beginning the operation. The next day, Kozlow carried out the action by seeing Stasek first and under the watch of Wilcox and her men, but she was perplexed since Stasek was conducting a meeting with the buyer, which was not included in the scenario that had been created previously. This made Wilcox have to follow the movement pattern of her target. Upon arrival at the transaction site, Kozlow found an oddity where the buyer didn't look like an addict and looked awkward. Kozlow believes the person with him is an undercover cop who has no idea who he is. Kozlow also asked him to leave since his life was in danger, but the cop did something unexpected. He took out a handgun and leveled it at Kozlow as a bluff. Stasek's shot, however, managed to strike the police officer's abdomen, which infuriated Kozlow because all of the scenarios he had planned with Wilcox had failed. Kozlow quickly fled under the guise of needing to smoke, signaling Wilcox to secure the area straight away. However, unexpected things happened because it turned out that Wilcox instead decided to leave the place. She withdrew her troops so as not to ambush the place. After cleaning up the police corps, Kozlow now arrives at the headquarters of Richard Klimek, who is a drug lord. Klimek viciously beat Stasek for interrupting his business following the previous shooting at the cops. While Kozlow was willing to comply with Klimek's request, he feared that doing so would prevent the prior shooting case from being investigated too deeply by the police, which would eventually implicate him and destroy his firm. Klimek also claimed that Kozlow's prison term would be brief since he had recruited a team of excellent attorneys to defend him, but it was later revealed that this strategy was not just to cover up the prior case, but Klimek also hoped to turn Kozlow into a drug dealer in prison. Unfortunately, Klimek had arrested Kozlow's wife and kid, so he couldn't refuse his request. Meanwhile, on a riverbank, the body of a former police officer named Daniel Gomez was found by Edward Grenz, who was Daniel's superior in his unit. Kozlow is shown meeting with Wilcox in a new location, and he wants an explanation for the decision made by the FBI agent during the prior shooting. Instead of obtaining an explanation, Kozlow was charged with the fatal shooting of a police officer. Not only that, but Klimek's statement that he would confine Kozlow this time propelled him even farther into the mission. Hearing all of that clearly annoyed Kozlow, but he couldn't do much about it since Wilcox's employers had threatened him with a flurry of lawsuits alleging that Kozlow was Daniel's murderer. Kozlow, who feels trapped, can only accept that he will go to jail and become an FBI informant. But without anyone knowing, it turns out that Kozlow had anticipated everything. He recorded all his conversations with the FBI. While Edward is still reluctant to accept his comrades' deaths, he continues to seek information from someone he suspects of being Daniel's murderer. He even suspected Kozlow was to blame for the murders of his soldiers, but it was later revealed that Kozlow was a former military and FBI agent. However, Edward was still fascinated by the Kozlow suspect. During the festivities leading up to Kozlow's arrest, it was revealed that Klimek had come with his wife to eat with Kozlow and Sophia. Everything seemed normal, but what was interesting was that Edward had been stalking Kozlow's house before the event started, not only suspicious of the drug kingpin, but Edward was also confused when the next day he found Kozlow, who had been arrested by the police, in his yard. Edward went straight to Wilcox's office and inquired about the FBI's participation in Kozlow's release. To his understanding, Kozlow should still be serving his 20-year sentence, yet he has already been freed on parole after just spending 4 years. Furthermore, he discovered CCTV camera catches of Kozlo at the scene of Daniel's death, including a female figure in the automobile he mistook for Wilcox. Feeling cornered, Wilcox and his superiors could only remain silent when Edward was expressing everything.
Not gonna tell me, huh?
While being held in a large jail cell, Kozlo is met by other inmates who identify him as Klimek's person. Meanwhile, Sophia is placing narcotics into a dead dove, which is subsequently carried by a drone and dumped just above the jail. It turned out that all of this was a trick used by Klimek in distributing his drugs to the prison. Kozlo managed to grab the bird's carcass and deposit it in a rubbish bag the next day while cleaning. Meanwhile, Edward, who is still conducting investigation, makes a visit to Sophia's place of business and immediately queries her about her husband's position. However, Sophia apparently refused to be honest and instead kicked Edward out of the business because she didn't want anything worse to happen to her family. Edward then left, leaving his business card in the hopes that Sophia would rethink and contact him if something happened to her. Edward also assures her that he will thoroughly investigate the case that happened to Kozlo and seek his release if Sophia wants to cooperate with him. Meanwhile, Kozlo, who was already in prison, started to distribute drugs and was approached by another gang named Vermin. He had just recently attempted to communicate with Edward and Kozlo. Edward then warned that another gang would be waiting for him in prison if he did not reveal any information concerning Daniel's death. Soon after, Kozlo was taken to a room and brutally abused by several offenders, including a prison guard. They even hanged Kozlo to conceal the fact that he had committed suicide because he believed his life was in danger, so Kozlo admitted that he was an informant trying to learn everything there was to know about Klimek. After hearing his confession, the black convicts finally let go of the rope that held Kozlo's neck. From this it was revealed that they were business rivals of the drug kingpin. Meanwhile, at the FBI headquarters, Wilcox and Keith Montgomery, her superiors, are panicked by Edward's action, who actually goes to the prison where Kozlo is being held. He had just recently attempted to communicate with Edward and Kozlo. Edward then warned that another gang would be waiting for him in prison if he did not reveal any information concerning Daniel's death. Soon after, Kozlo was taken to a room and brutally abused by several offenders, including a prison guard. They even hanged Kozlo to conceal the fact that he had committed suicide because he believed his life was in danger, so Kozlo admitted that he was an informant trying to learn everything there was to know about Klimek. Not wanting to continue arguing with his subordinates, Keith said that Wilcox's career could be seriously threatened and could even be jailed if she didn't kill Kozlo immediately. Because he thinks there will only be Wilcox and Kozlo's names in the document so that Keith won't be involved, this is where the cunning lies. Meanwhile, Kozlo, who had been successful in gathering the identities of those involved in Klimek's scheme in prison, ultimately alerted Wilcox. However, Kozlo became skeptical right away since Wilcox, who should have been pleased with the news, stayed silent and did not reply. Intriguing what happened to the FBI, Kozlo called his wife, who asked him to leave with their child. Kozlo fears that someone has betrayed him. He also wants that Sophia use the key he gave him earlier, which turns out to be the key to open a box holding all of the recordings of Kozlo's conversations with the FBI thus far. Unfortunately, Sophia, who was opening the box, was suddenly visited by Wilcox. This corrupt FBI agent also immediately took all the tapes containing the recorded conversations and played them in the car. We don't know what got into her mind. Wilcox looked confused after getting the tape without her knowledge. Klimek, who knew Kozlo's true identity, promptly dispatched his men to murder him. Kozlo was attacked, but he was able to restrain them. He even had the opportunity to cause a commotion by snatching a warden.
Back up! I will kill him right now! Back the fuck up! Fuck back! Stay the fuck back! Stay back! You fucking...
Meanwhile, Stasek and other Klimek men have been sighted in Sofia, where they plan to murder Kozlow's wife and children by torching their home. Fortunately, Edward came at the same time as the awful action, and despite being shot in the leg, he also managed to shoot dead Klimek's men there. Meanwhile, Kozlow, who was besieged, cleverly exchanged his clothes for the uniform of the warden he was holding hostage. He managed to trick the officers. A moment later the sniper opened fire at the warden who had changed his clothes by Kozlow. They thought that the figure was Kozlow, even though it was Kozlow who was behind the warden's uniform. Edward immediately went to Wilcox's office and inquired about the FBI's involvement in Kozlow's release. According to his understanding, Kozlow should still be serving his 20-year term, but he was released on parole after only 4 years. He also obtained CCTV camera footage of Kozlow at the scene of Daniel's killing, including a female figure in the car he mistaken for Wilcox. Wilcox and his employers could only remain silent as Edward revealed everything. While being held in a large jail cell, Kozlow is met by other inmates who identify him as Klimek's person. At the end of the film, Sofia and her child are seen in a city park. From a distance, Kozlow is secretly watching his wife and child, but unfortunately he can't get closer because there are a number of FBI agents following Sofia and her child. A moment later Edward approached Kozlow and gave him a passport and a number of files that would lead the former military man to hide in another place. Edward also said that Wilcox had promised to bring Kozlow together with his family, of course, when the situation was conducive, and the film ended. That's all the recap. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to stay updated with recaps of our latest films. Your support would be appreciated. I hope to see you next time.